D-Day from the German perspective. Stobwasser reported to Rommel on May 22 with classified intelligence from sources in Sweden, including intercepted communications and reconnaissance photographs. Herr Generalfeldmarschall, the industrial production figures are now confirmed through diplomatic channels. The Americans have produced 42,000 landing craft of various types. Their LST production alone, just the large ship-to-shore transports, exceeds 1,000 vessels. One American facility, the Dravo Corporation in Pittsburgh, has produced more landing craft than our entire Kriegsmarine has produced of all vessel types combined since 1939. Rommel studied the photographs showing what appeared to be parking lots filled with landing craft lined up like automobiles. Shipping them from the interior on railroads, Stobwasser continued. Facilities in Nebraska, Kentucky, Minnesota, 1,000 miles from the ocean producing ocean-going vessels. American production had reached metrics that shattered conventional military-industrial assumptions. American LST production, 1,051 vessels by June 1944. German naval construction of all types, 1,156 vessels 1930-91944. American destroyer production, 349 vessels. German destroyer production, 17 vessels. A single American industrial sector exceeded the entire industrial output of the Greater German Reich. The Ford Willow Run plant produced one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Germany produced 34,000 aircraft in 1943. America produced 85,898 aircraft in 1943. Single American automotive factories converted to aircraft production exceeded the output of the entire German aviation industry. The first tactical adjustment came on May 28. 3 squadrons of Luftwaffe bombers, 18 Junkers Ju-88s, attempted night attacks on landing craft concentrations near Portsmouth. They tried approaching from the north, using cloud cover at 12,000 feet altitude. The Americans deployed radar-equipped night fighters, P-61 Black Widows, that intercepted the formation 60 miles from target. The Germans attempted to descend through cloud cover to evade radar detection. The Americans maintained contact through radar and engaged at 8,000 feet. They tried separating and approaching individually. American fighters vectored by ground control intercepted each aircraft separately. They attempted to jettison bombs and flee. All aircraft were engaged before reaching the channel. At 22:47, the first Ju-88 was destroyed. At 22:49, 2 more. At 22:51, 4 more. At 22:54, 3 more. By 23:02, all 18 aircraft were destroyed or forced down. Total engagement duration, 15 minutes. Luftwaffe losses, 18 aircraft, 54 aircrew killed or captured. Allied losses, 0 aircraft, minor damage to 1 P-61. Kill ratio, 18:0. Elapsed time from initial radar contact to mission failure, 23 minutes. Kill time average per aircraft, 50 seconds from engagement to destruction. On June 2, reconnaissance aircraft reported vessel concentrations that intelligence concluded were impossible. Visual count from 3 reconnaissance flights, 847 landing craft, 231 naval vessels including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Caen, Hampshire, and Sussex ports. Spadle's analysis. Count must include all vessels sighted over 3 flights, counted multiple times. Estimated actual numbers, 200 landing craft, 70 naval vessels, still formidable but within expected parameters. Stobwasser presented his final assessment on June 4. The invasion fleet exists and exceeds all previous estimates. The Americans have achieved industrial mobilization on a scale unprecedented in military history. They have, Rommel interrupted. We are prepared. The Atlantic Wall is complete. Let them come. We will destroy them on the beaches. But in his private quarters that evening, Rommel dictated a letter to his wife. The enemy's resources are so far superior to ours that I am deeply concerned about the coming battle. Richter observed the final pre-invasion preparations from WN-62, watching as more vessels appeared each day. On June 4, he counted 312 vessels visible from his position alone. On June 5, the number had grown to 489. Not possible, his battalion commander had told him during the evening briefing. You are counting the same vessels multiple times. Be more careful with your observation reports. But Richter knew what he had seen. The horizon was darkening with vessels, a concentration of maritime power that exceeded anything in his experience. Willow Run's Revolution, Willow Run, Michigan, June 1944. At the Willow Run bomber plant, the assembly process achieved 433 feet per hour. Every 63 minutes, another B-24 Liberator rolled off the line, engines turning, fuel tanks filled, guns mounted. This single facility produced more four-engine bombers in 1 month than the entire German aviation industry produced in 3 months. Americans discarded 18,900 rivets per shift as unacceptable quality, slightly bent, improperly heated, or showing minor surface defects. German aircraft assembly allocated 16,400 rivets per shift for an entire factory complex assembling Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. What Americans threw away, as beneath their quality standards could have built German fighters. The rejected rivets from Willow Run represented not scarcity versus abundance, but a fundamental difference in industrial philosophy. Americans could afford to waste because their productive capacity exceeded their needs. Workers threw away 847 pounds of aluminum shavings daily from milling and cutting operations. This aluminum scrap, waste from normal machining processes, equaled the total aluminum allocation for 16 Messerschmitt fighters. The Luftwaffe allocated aluminum by the gram, requiring engineers to calculate every ounce in aircraft design. Americans discarded more aluminum in manufacturing waste than Germany allocated for combat aircraft production. The scrap heaps at a single American factory contained enough strategic material to equip a German fighter squadron. The cafeteria at Willow Run served 32,000 meals per day, discarding 1,247 pounds of edible food waste, untouched portions, vegetables, bread, meat that workers did not eat. This exceeded the daily ration allocation for 4,700 German soldiers. The average American factory worker consumed 3,200 calories daily. The average German soldier received 2,700 calories. The difference, 500 calories, was more than the total daily ration for civilian populations in occupied territories. Americans threw away more food from a single factory cafeteria than fed 3 Wehrmacht battalions. Fuel consumption at American manufacturing plants illustrated the resource differential with brutal clarity. Willow Run consumed 47,000 gallons of various fuels daily, heating oil, diesel for equipment, gasoline for transport vehicles. The entire German 7th Army in Normandy received 58,000 gallons daily for combat operations. One American factory used almost as much fuel for production as an entire German army used for combat. The mathematics of logistics were becoming a weapon more deadly than any tank or aircraft. America could waste in production what Germany needed for war. Testing and quality control procedures consumed resources that would be combat allocations elsewhere. Aircraft engines at Willow Run underwent 124 hours of testing before installation, run at various power settings, subjected to temperature extremes, monitored for vibration and performance. The fuel consumed in testing one Pratt & Whitney R1830 engine, 1,840 gallons, exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for a German panzer company. The oil consumed in testing 97 gallons exceeded the monthly allocation for lubricants for an entire German infantry battalion. Americans tested their engines longer than Germans could afford to run theirs. Staubwasser appeared in intelligence briefings throughout May with production statistics that should have triggered strategic reassessment. The Americans have produced 18,188 aircraft in the first quarter of 1944. Our production for the same period, 5,489 aircraft. This represents a 3.3 to 1 production advantage. Their production capacity is accelerating while ours plateaus. By year's end, they will exceed 40,000 aircraft while we struggle to maintain 15,000. One American factory produces more combat aircraft than our entire industry. The response from command: quality defeats quantity. One German pilot with superior training and aircraft can defeat multiple American aircraft. But the mathematics could not be dismissed. Even with superior training and equipment, no force could survive a 3-1 numerical disadvantage indefinitely. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, 06:30 HOURS. Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter was preparing morning coffee in the bunker at WN-62 when the bombardment began. At 06:30, the first naval shells, 14-inch rounds from USS Texas, impacted the bluff above his position. At 0631, the bunker's walls shook from concussion despite 3 feet of reinforced concrete. At 0633, he emerged to the observation port and saw them. The invasion fleet covering the ocean from horizon to horizon, a concentration of vessels that defied his ability to count. Hundreds, thousands. Every type of vessel imaginable and some he had never seen. At 0635, the first wave of landing craft approached the beach. Richter counted 47 craft in his sector alone, each carrying 30 to 40 men. At 0637, his bunker's 5 cm gun opened fire. At 0638, one landing craft was hit, erupting in flames. Elapsed time from engagement to destruction, 15 seconds. Kill time, 12 seconds from shell impact to explosion. At 0639, another craft was hit. At 0640, a third, but for every craft destroyed, 10 more continued forward. At 0642, American soldiers reached the shingle at the base of the bluff. At 0644, German machine guns opened fire. The engagement that followed wasn't combat in any traditional sense, it was mathematics. At 0647, Richter's bunker identified 8 landing craft hitting the beach in 60 seconds. At 0652, 14 more. At 0658, 23 more. The rate of arrival exceeded the rate at which defensive positions could engage. German positions destroyed landing craft, killed soldiers on the beach, created casualties that would haunt American memory for generations. But the landing craft kept coming. Waves of them. Continuous replacement. For every craft destroyed, 3 more appeared. For every wave pushed back, another landed. The defensive fire, murderous and precise, could not kill faster than America could replace. At 0715, naval gunfire intensified. 16-inch shells from USS Arkansas began systematically destroying bunker positions. At 0718, WN-61 to Richter's right ceased transmitting. Direct hit, bunker collapsed, crew of 12 killed instantly. Elapsed time from target acquisition to destruction, 45 seconds. At 0723, WN-63 to his left was hit. At 0729, WN-64. By 0745, 7 strongpoints in the immediate sector had been neutralized by naval gunfire. The Atlantic wall's interlocking fields of fire were being picked apart by ships firing from beyond the range of coastal guns. At 0800, Richter's bunker was still operational, its gun crew having destroyed 14 landing craft and inflicted an estimated 200 casualties. But the beach was filling with American soldiers. At 0815, engineers began clearing obstacles. At 0830, tanks were landing from LSTs, the large landing craft that intelligence had assured them the Allies did not possess in meaningful numbers. At 0845, Richter counted 27 Sherman tanks on the beach. At 0900, 41 tanks. The ammunition expenditure was catastrophic from Germany's perspective. Richter's bunker fired 247 rounds in the first 3 hours. Adjacent positions fired thousands of machine gun rounds. The ammunition expended on Omaha Beach in the morning of June 6 exceeded the monthly allocation for the entire 352nd Infantry Division. American naval vessels fired 8,124 14-inch and 16-inch shells. The weight of high explosives delivered by naval bombardment in 6 hours exceeded the total bomb tonnage dropped by the Luftwaffe on London during the entire Blitz. At 0930, American infantry began working up the bluff, using Bangalore torpedoes to clear wire obstacles. At 0945, the first American soldiers reached the top of the bluff. At 10:00, Richter received orders to abandon WN-62 and withdraw to secondary positions. Total engagement time, 3 hours, 30 minutes. German defenders had inflicted approximately 2,400 American casualties on Omaha Beach. But 34,000 American soldiers had landed successfully. The mathematics were brutal. Even with kill ratios favoring German defenders, America could absorb the casualties and continue attacking. Germany could not afford the defenders. By nightfall June 6, 156,000 Allied troops had landed across 5 beaches. German defenders had inflicted 12,000 casualties. The Atlantic Wall, 3 years in construction, incorporating 6 million mines and 14,000 fortified positions, had delayed the invasion by less than 1 day. Richter's bunker, which had functioned exactly as designed and inflicted heavy casualties, had ultimately been abandoned because no fortification could withstand the weight of steel the Allies could bring to bear. The fuel consumed by the Allied invasion fleet on June 6, 1.8 million gallons, exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for the entire Wehrmacht on the Western Front. The ammunition expended exceeded quarterly allocations. A single day of American military operations consumed more resources than the German military could allocate in weeks. June 10, 1944. FALAISC. 1530 HOURS. 47 Panzer IV tanks of the 12th SS Panzer Division faced 214 American Sherman tanks of the 2nd Armored Division near Villers-Bocage. The engagement lasted 3 hours, 47 minutes. The German tanks, technically superior in armor and main gun penetration, fought with tactical excellence and crew experience averaging 3 years. The Americans attacked with numerical superiority and supply advantage that negated technical deficiencies. At 15:30, the first contact occurred at 2,400 meters. At 15:33, German Panzer IVs destroyed 7 Shermans. Kill time per tank, approximately 26 seconds from hit to destruction or mission kill. At 15:38, American forces closed range to 1,200 meters, sacrificing tanks to reach effective range. At 15:44, 16 more Shermans destroyed. At 15:51, American forces at 800 meters within effective range for 75 guns. At 15:56, German tanks began taking losses. 3 panzers destroyed, elapsed time, 4 minutes of sustained engagement. At 16:15, German forces had destroyed 43 Sherman tanks. American forces had destroyed 8 panzers. Kill ratio, 5-4-1 in Germany's favor. At 16:30, the mathematics shifted. American forces still had 171 operational tanks. German forces had 39. The numerical advantage had overcome the technical advantage. At 16:45, American forces enveloped the German position from 3 sides. At 17:00, German forces began withdrawing. At 17:15, 14 more panzers destroyed during the retreat. At 17:45, engagement concluded. Total German losses, 29 Panzer IVs destroyed or abandoned. American losses, 67 Sherman tanks destroyed or disabled. But at 18:30, American recovery crews arrived, retrieving damaged tanks. By midnight June 10, 47 of the 67 damaged Shermans had been recovered to repair facilities. By June 12, 31 had been repaired and returned to service. American tank strength on June 13, 178 operational Shermans, more than before the engagement. German tank strength, 18 operational panzers. The 29 destroyed panzers could not be replaced. Germany produced 186 Panzer IVs in June 1944. America produced 1,504 Sherman tanks in June 1944. A single American factory, the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant, produced more tanks in 1 month than Germany's entire industry. The ammunition expended in this engagement exceeded monthly allocations with precision that Staubwasser would later document. The American force fired 12,847 .75 rounds. The monthly allocation for the entire 7th Army's tank forces, 8,900 rounds. One American tank division in one engagement expended more ammunition than an entire German Army's monthly allocation. German forces fired 3,247 .75 rounds, their total remaining allocation for the month. At 19:00 hours, Generalfeldmarschall Rommel reviewed the battle report. 43 enemy tanks destroyed. A victory by any conventional measure. But the enemy still held the field with 171 operational tanks. His forces had lost 29 irreplaceable vehicles. "This is not sustainable," he said to Spadel. "We achieve favorable kill ratios, we fight with tactical excellence, and we lose because they can replace their losses in days and we cannot replace ours at all." Staubwasser was present at that briefing. "Herr Generalfeldmarschall, the American production advantage is now operationally decisive. We are not fighting an enemy army. We are fighting an enemy economy. Their industrial capacity exceeds ours by factors we cannot overcome through tactical or operational excellence." June 13, 1944. Caen, 08:00 hours. The Battle of Caen illustrated the resource differential with surgical precision. 217 German tanks faced 1,348 Allied tanks and 2,300 artillery pieces. The Allied force could afford to simply pound German positions with high explosives until resistance collapsed. No tactical elegance, no operational artistry, merely the application of overwhelming firepower that German forces could not match or counter. At 0800, Allied artillery began preparatory bombardment. At 0815, German positions at grid reference 245,789 received 847 artillery rounds in 15 minutes. At 0830, grid reference 247,792 received 1,124 rounds in 20 minutes. By 0900, Allied artillery had fired 31,400 rounds. The ammunition expended in 1 hour exceeded the monthly allocation for 23 German infantry divisions. The guns were never at risk of ammunition shortages. Supply dumps behind Allied lines contained 890,000 rounds, more ammunition than the entire German 7th Army would receive in 6 months. At 11:30, Allied aircraft appeared 178 bombers escorted by 244 fighters. At 11:35, the first bombs fell on German positions in Caen. At 11:42, 2,678 tons of high explosives had been delivered. At 11:45, the bombers departed, having encountered no Luftwaffe resistance. 0 aircraft lost. The weight of explosives delivered in 10 minutes exceeded what the Luftwaffe could deliver in a week. At 12:00, Allied tanks advanced. The German forces fought with characteristic skill, destroying 47 Allied tanks in the first hour. But the Allied tanks kept coming. For every German tactical success, the Allies responded with resources. Positions that destroyed multiple enemy tanks were simply bypassed and neutralized with artillery. German strong points that would have been strategic obstacles in previous wars were reduced to rubble by naval gunfire from ships 15 miles offshore. By 17:00, June 13, German forces had destroyed 124 Allied tanks and armored vehicles. Allied forces had destroyed 41 German tanks and effectively neutralized 3 defensive positions through overwhelming firepower. The kill ratio favored Germany. The territorial outcome favored the Allies. By June 15, the 124 Allied tanks destroyed had been replaced. Replacement tanks arrived from supply depots with full crews, full ammunition loads, full fuel. The 41 German tanks destroyed could not be replaced. Production could not keep pace with losses. Rommel appeared at the Caen headquarters on June 16, observing the devastation. "We can win every tactical engagement and still lose," he said to the assembled officers. "The mathematics are inescapable. They lose 100 tanks and replace them in 3 days. We lose 40 tanks and cannot replace them at all." At 18:30, June 16, Rommel's staff car was strafed by P-47 Thunderbolts on the road between Caen and La Roche-Guyon. At 18:31, the first burst of .50 caliber fire struck the vehicle. At 18:32, Rommel was thrown from the car, suffering severe head injuries. Elapsed time from first enemy contact to mission kill, 90 seconds. Kill time, 73 seconds from first burst to incapacitation. The Desert Fox, victor of a dozen battles across 2 continents, was removed from command by 4 American aircraft in less time than it took to fire artillery barrage. He would survive but never return to command. The Mockers' War was over. June 25, 1944. St. Lo. The battle for St. Lo demonstrated systematic annihilation through resource application. 84 German tanks faced 447 American tanks. The Americans did not attempt tactical elegance. They applied force. At 06:00, artillery bombardment began. At 06:30, aircraft delivered 1,247 tons of high explosives. At 07:00, tanks advanced behind a rolling barrage. German forces fought brilliantly, achieving local victories, destroying enemy armor with technical superiority and crew expertise. None of it mattered. At 09:15, 23 American tanks destroyed in the first engagement, kill time averaging 38 seconds from penetration to catastrophic kill. At 09:47, German strong point destroyed by naval gunfire. At 10:23, 31 more American tanks destroyed. At 11:00, German defensive line broken by sheer weight of numbers. By 14:00, German forces had destroyed 97 American tanks and armored vehicles. American losses, 97 tanks. German losses, 42 tanks. Kill ratio, 2-3-1 in Germany's favor. At 15:00, American replacement tanks arrived 114 Shermans, fresh from supply depots, fully crewed and equipped. At 15:30, the attack resumed. By nightfall, St. Lo was in American hands. Final counts: American losses, 156 tanks destroyed. German losses, 54 tanks destroyed. The Americans replaced their losses in 4 days. The Germans could not replace theirs. The fuel consumed in this 1 day of operations illustrated the strategic impossibility of Germany's position. American forces consumed 94,000 gallons of fuel. The entire German 7th Army's daily allocation, 58,000 gallons. One American division consumed more fuel in one battle than an entire German army received for all operations. The ammunition expenditure, 47,000 artillery rounds, exceeded the monthly allocation for 6 German divisions. Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter, who had survived Omaha Beach and fought through the hedgerows, observed the final collapse at St. Lo from a forward observation post. "This wasn't combat," he would later tell interrogators. "This was systematic annihilation. They didn't outfight us. They buried us. We destroyed their tanks. They brought more tanks. We held positions. They obliterated the positions with naval gunfire. We achieved tactical victories. They achieved strategic victory through resource application that made tactics irrelevant." The ammunition expended in this engagement exceeded monthly allocations with brutal precision. Americans fired 47,924 artillery rounds. Germans fired 4,247 rounds. The Americans expended 11 times more ammunition, but more significantly, the Americans had 890,000 rounds in reserve. The Germans had fired their allocation for the month. August 1944, prisoner of war interrogation center, Paris. Oberst Anton Staubwasser sat in the interrogation room, his uniform jacket missing its insignia. The American intelligence officer across from him, a Major Richardson from Michigan, had the decency to offer coffee before beginning. Real coffee, not ersatz. The aroma alone was propaganda waste on prisoners what Germany couldn't allocate for commanders. "Tell me about your production estimates," Richardson began, sliding a folder across the table. "Your intelligence reports from January 1944. Staubwasser opened the folder, seeing his own reports, his warnings that had been dismissed. "We were not defeated by better soldiers," he said. "We were defeated by better factories. Your industrial production exceeded ours by factors that made tactical excellence irrelevant. I calculated in March 1944 that your production of landing craft exceeded 40,000 vessels. Rommel dismissed this as impossible. It was conservative. You produced 42,000 landing craft. One American factory, Dravo Corporation in Pittsburgh, produced more vessels than our entire Kriegsmarine." Richardson nodded, making notes. "What about aircraft production? Your production advantage was approximately 5, 1 in 1944. Willow Run 1 facility produced more bombers monthly than our entire industry. You produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944. We produced 39,000, but the differential was worse than numbers suggest. You could afford to waste aircraft in training. We couldn't. Your pilots had 400 hours training. Ours had 80, not because our training was inferior, but because we lacked fuel for training flights." Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter's testimony came 3 days later, conducted by a different interrogator. "I saw the invasion fleet on June 6. I counted vessels until counting became meaningless. Hundreds. Thousands, every vessel type. We had been assured this fleet didn't exist, that Allied shipbuilding capacity couldn't produce vessels in these numbers. We destroyed landing craft. They kept coming. We inflicted casualties. More soldiers landed. The Atlantic Wall functioned as designed. It didn't matter. You brought more force than any fortification could stop." "The mathematics were what?" the interrogator prompted. "Apocalyptic," Richter said. "That's the word. The mathematics were apocalyptic. One American factory produced more than our entire Reich. You discarded more resources than we allocated for combat. At Omaha Beach, I fired 247 rounds. I inflicted approximately 200 casualties. I destroyed 14 landing craft. None of it mattered because you had more landing craft, more ammunition, more soldiers than we could possibly kill." Additional testimonies from captured officers revealed the scope of the miscalculation. "We brought swords to an industrial revolution," said Generalmajor Max Pemsel. "Our weapons were superior piece for piece. Our tactics were superior. Our soldiers fought with excellence, but you brought an economy. You weaponized production itself. One American worker produced more war materiel than 10 German workers. Not because German workers were inferior, but because American industry was organized on principles that made individual productivity scalable to strategic advantage. Their excess capacity exceeded our maximum effort, stated General Major Rudolf Hoffmann. We operated at 100% of industrial capacity. We mobilized every resource. We stripped occupied territories. We enslaved populations. We achieved maximum extraction. America operated at 65% of industrial capacity and still outproduced us 5-1. They could lose equipment and replace it in days. We could lose equipment and never replace it. They could lose 100 tanks and replace them in a week, said Oberst Kurt Kaufmann. We could lose 10 tanks and not replace them in 3 months. The mathematics were simple. Attrition warfare favors the side with deeper resources. We inflicted casualties at favorable ratios and still lost because their capacity to replace exceeded our capacity to inflict losses. The mathematics were terminal, said Oberstleutnant Friedrich von Kriegern. American production 1,504 tanks monthly. German production 186 tanks monthly. American aircraft production 8,000 aircraft monthly. German production 3,200 aircraft monthly. Single American facilities exceeded entire Reich production. The Willow Run plant alone produced more four-engine bombers than all German factories combined. Production statistics stated by German officers in captivity revealed the full scope of industrial defeat. American tank production 1944, 18,048 tanks. German tank production 1944, 2,232 tanks. American aircraft production 1944, 96,318 aircraft. German aircraft production 1944, 39,807 aircraft. American merchant ship construction 1944, 12.7 million tons. German merchant ship construction 1944, 87,000 tons. Single American shipyard, more tonnage than entire Kriegsmarine. The ammunition differential demonstrated industrial capacity as military weapon. American artillery ammunition production, 47 million rounds annually. German production, 12 million rounds annually. American small arms ammunition, 18 billion rounds annually. German production, 3 billion rounds annually. Americans expended in training what Germans allocated for combat. Mathematical finality, the landing craft proved that democratic industrial mobilization, properly organized, could achieve production metrics that totalitarian command economies could not match. Free workers at Higgins Industries in New Orleans, earning market wages and working voluntary shifts, outproduced enslaved laborers at German facilities. Democratic cooperation, with its inefficiencies and compromises, exceeded totalitarian command efficiency when applied to industrial production at scale. Industrial abundance, achieved through voluntary cooperation and capitalist competition, buried ideological claims of fascist superiority under the weight of statistics that could not be denied or propagandized away. June 6, 1944, Generalfeldmarschall Rommel had reviewed intelligence reports at La Roche-Guyon, dismissing American landing craft production figures as impossible propaganda. August 25, 1944, Paris fell to Allied forces. Rommel, gravely wounded, would be forced to commit suicide on October 14, 1944, after being implicated in the July 20 plot against Hitler. His confidence in the Atlantic Wall's impregnability had been based on mathematics ratios, production figures, tactical calculations, that were correct in isolation, but failed to account for industrial revolution occurring simultaneously across the Atlantic. The mockery in that shadowh, Americans building landing craft in furniture factories, became history's most expensive miscalculation, quantified in 5.5 million German military deaths and a nation divided for 45 years. American industrial mobilization demonstrated principles that extended beyond military victory. Democratic societies, when mobilized, could achieve production and coordination that totalitarian states could not match because free workers with ownership stake in outcomes produced more than conscripted labor. Market competition, properly harnessed to national purpose, generated innovation and efficiency that command economies could not replicate. The productive capacity of free peoples exceeded the capacity of enslaved populations precisely because freedom itself became a multiplier of effort. Workers who benefit from production work harder than workers who produce at gunpoint. The lesson remains urgent. Dismissing democratic nations as weak because they prefer peace, or underestimating free people's productive capacity when mobilized for just causes, invites catastrophic miscalculation. The mathematics of June 6, 1944 landing craft counted in thousands, tanks replaced in days, aircraft produced in hours, proved that industrial democracy weaponizes abundance in ways that authoritarian scarcity cannot counter. The Atlantic Wall, 3 years in construction and millions of tons of concrete, delayed industrial democracy by 14 hours. The German officers who laughed at American production figures in January 1944 were burying their nation's future in that laughter. The final lesson of D-Day, learned at the cost of millions of lives, remains. Never mistake a democracy's preference for peace as incapacity for war. For when aroused, democratic industrial capacity becomes an unstoppable force that buries military excellence under the weight of production that turns factories into strategic weapons more powerful than any tank or aircraft.